Hi everyone, welcome to Bonnie Carolee Makes Cards. Today's card features a simple ink smooshing technique with Simon Says Stamp Simple Stem. I love leafy stem dies. I think they're so versatile. I know that I will use this one time and time again, and it is an excellent price point. In my mind, if a product is versatile, it is good value for your money, and certainly something that I consider when I make my purchases. So let's get started. I like to use Bristol Smooth cardstock for this technique. Not only is this cardstock great for ink blending, it is also perfect for ink smooshing and working with water brush pens, as it can withstand a small amount of water. I'm working with Distress Oxide inks, pumice stone, hickory smoke, and peacock feathers. This was a combination that I tried out on a previous card and I just fell in love with it, so had to use it again. Ink smooshing is exactly as the name suggests. The ink is smooshed down on a surface and then it is activated with water. I like to use a Tim Holtz sprayer. I apply my colors one at a time, and I use my heat tool to mostly dry it in between applications. It just gives me a little bit of control over where that color goes, and I do try to get it evenly distributed across the panel. I had applied the peacock feathers on top of both of the grays and found it just a little bit overpowering, so I went back in with hickory smoke and added a layer of that to help tone it down. I applied pumice stone to another piece of Bristol Smooth cardstock that I would use for die cutting. For some added interest, I spattered the panel with a little bit of Distress Stain brushed pewter. It was tapped off onto the paper with a small watercolor brush to try to achieve a fine spatter. The panel was die cut 3 times using the Simple Stem die. Yeah, it did take a little bit of time to remove all the center cuts from the leaves. Now, aren't you glad I speed up the video during the editing process? So now back to the ink smoosh panel. It was trimmed down to an A2 size, 5.5 inches by 4.25 inches. It was die cut with one of my favorite dies, A2 thin frames. I used the second largest one. I also die cut fog gray cardstock so that the gray frame could replace the ink smooshed one. The frame is quite fine. I put the outer portion of the ink smoosh panel along with the frame upside down on my surface and then used a little bit of Scotch tape to hold it together. Working with one piece just makes it a lot easier to get it adhered to the card base. I adhered the rectangular cutout from the ink smoosh panel to white sheet foam. Before trimming it down, I let it dry under some weight so that there is good contact between the paper and the foam. After laying out the grouping of 3 stems, I decided some additional detail was needed for the card. I die cut one of the smaller frames out of the gray cardstock that would sit on top of the panel. The 3 stems were adhered to the card. I made sure to apply the glue only to the stem area so that later I could lift up those leaves to give further dimension. The sentiment, Simon Says Stamp's Big Hugs, was also die cut from Simon's Fog Gray cardstock 3 times, stacked and adhered to the bottom right-hand corner. I used a simple jewel picker and Nouveau Precision Glue to apply a ton of Studio Cash's Blue Sky crystals. I love sparkle, and this just added the finishing touch that I think the card needed. And that wraps up this easy ink smoosh card featuring the beautiful die cut from Simon Says Stamp Simple Stem. As always, I appreciate your visit.